You know how certain smells just take you back? For me, my grandmother's house was always lavender and old books. That smell was safety. It was warmth. It was the promise of freshly baked cookies. But when my parents left me there for the weekend, that scent was gone. It had been replaced by something else, something cold and metallic, like the air right after a lightning strike. The house looked the same, the furniture was all in its place, and the woman who looked exactly like my grandmother was there. But her smile never quite reached her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was just a little too deep, a little too hollow to be the one I loved. My parents had to go out of town for some last-minute work conference. "It'll be fun," my mom had said, her voice sounding tinny over the phone. "Just like old times, you and Grandma." I was 16, a little old to be left with my grandmother, but I didn't mind. I adored her. She's the one who taught me how to bake. She told me all these stories about growing up on a farm, and her hugs felt like a force field against anything wrong with the world. Her house was my second home. But from the second I stepped out of the taxi, something felt deeply wrong. The prize-winning roses she was so proud of, they were wilting, their heads drooping sadly. The welcome mat was crooked. I know, they're small things you'd normally just ignore, but they felt like tiny cracks in a perfect vase, hinting at a much bigger break underneath. When she opened the door, the feeling got worse. It was her face, her silver hair in the same neat bun, her favorite floral apron tied at her waist, but the spark in her eyes? It just wasn't there. It was like looking at a photograph instead of a person. "Hello, dear," she said. That voice was the first real shock. My grandma's voice was warm, almost musical. This was a monotone, a flat imitation. It had the shape of her words, but none of the soul. "Hi, Grandma," I mumbled, forcing a smile. I walked inside, braced for that comforting lavender smell, but all I got was that weird, sterile, metallic odor. It was faint, but it was there, a wrong note in the familiar scent of old wood and dust. The whole house felt cold, even though it was a warm summer evening. That first dinner was a masterclass in the uncanny. She made my favorite, roast chicken, but it was completely dry and tasteless. We just sat there at the table where I'd spent so many hours laughing, now wrapped in this heavy, awkward silence. I tried to fill it, babbling about school, my friends, anything. She'd just nod, her eyes locked on me with this unnerving focus. Her smiles were quick, mechanical things that didn't move the rest of her body. Later, I asked her about Mr. Henderson's cat, which was always getting stuck in her big oak tree. She just stared at me with a blank expression. "Who is Mr. Henderson?" she asked. My blood ran cold. She'd known Mr. Henderson for 30 years. They had coffee every Tuesday. It was impossible for her to forget that. I tried to laugh it off, saying she must be tired, but the excuse felt so thin, so pathetic. That night, lying in the lumpy guest bed, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house made me jump. I kept listening for the usual sounds of her, the soft padding of her slippers, the low murmur of the TV, but there was nothing, just a deep, unsettling silence. The next day was even worse. I constantly felt like I was being watched. I'd be reading in the living room and get that prickling feeling on my neck, and I'd look up to see her standing silently in the doorway, her face a total blank. Her movements were stiff and just off. She'd turn her head, but her shoulders would stay perfectly rigid. She'd reach for a glass, and her fingers would stretch just a little too far before snapping back. I tried to call my parents, but my phone had zero service. "Oh, the reception is just terrible out here," she said, her voice completely flat. I knew she was lying. I'd always had perfect service at her house. The dread was becoming suffocating. This thing looked like my grandmother. It wore her clothes and lived in her house, but it was an imposter, a copy, a hollow shell. The only question was, where was my real grandma? So I started looking. While she was in the garden, pulling at weeds with this weird, jerky motion, I snuck into her bedroom. It looked the same, but it felt sterile, like a museum exhibit. Her jewelry box was perfectly neat. My real grandma left it at a constant state of joyful, tangled chaos. Her desk, which was normally a disaster of letters and half-finished crosswords, was completely clear. Then, in the hall closet, tucked behind a stack of old blankets, I found it. It was my grandmother's antique silver hand mirror, or what was left of it. The glass was shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, but it wasn't just broken. It looked like something had tried to smash its way out from the inside. One large shard, about the size of my palm, was lying next to the frame. You know all that stuff from folklore and old horror movies about mirrors being gateways or portals, that a broken mirror can mean a separated soul? As I picked up that shard, my hand trembling, those old stories suddenly felt terrifyingly real. The glass was cold, unnaturally cold, and as I held it, that metallic smell seemed to get stronger, coming right from the broken piece of mirror. I heard the back door open. I quickly shoved the shard in my pocket and put the broken frame back where I found it. My heart was pounding. I had a piece of the puzzle, but I had no idea what picture it made. All I knew was that this piece of mirror felt important and very, very dangerous.
That evening, I decided to test a theory. The thing that looked like my grandmother was sitting in her armchair, just staring at the blank TV screen. She hadn't moved in an hour. As the sun set, I pulled the mirror shard from my pocket, my palms slick with sweat. With my back to her, I pretended to look out the window. I held the shard up, angling it just right so I could see her reflection. My breath caught in my throat. The reflection wasn't of my grandmother. In the shard, the figure in the chair was a twisted, elongated thing. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at impossible angles. It seemed to be made of a shimmering, dark material like oil on water that just swallowed the light around it. And where its face should have been, there was nothing, just a smooth, featureless surface. It was a monster wearing my grandmother's skin like a suit. I quickly lowered the glass, my mind reeling. I leaned against the wall, trying to get my breathing under control. The thing in the chair hadn't moved. It didn't know I'd seen it. The mirror didn't just reflect, it revealed the truth. Then a new, even more terrifying thought hit me. If this thing was here, where was she? The stories say mirrors can be prisons. Was it possible she'd been pulled inside? Later, I heard clattering noises from the kitchen that sounded nothing like my grandmother cooking. I gathered my courage and walked into her bedroom. The room was dark, with just the moonlight filtering through the curtains. I stood in the middle of the room, my hands shaking, and held up the shard again. I slowly panned it across the room. The room in the reflection was different. Same layout, same furniture, but it was all cast in a dead gray light. The colors were gone. The air looked thick and hazy like smoke. And then I saw her. In the reflection, huddled in the corner of the room, was my real grandmother. She was pale and translucent, her form shimmering like a heat haze. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She was looking right at me, her mouth open in a silent scream. She raised a trembling see-through hand and pressed it against an invisible barrier. She was trapped in a mirror world, while a monster wore her face in ours. A scream was caught in my own throat. I was looking at her, and she was looking at me, but we were separated by a whole plane of existence. Suddenly, in the reflection, my grandmother's eyes widened in fresh horror, staring at something behind me. I spun around. The creature was standing in the doorway, its head tilted at an impossible angle. Its mask of my grandmother's face was gone. In its place was that smooth, featureless void I'd seen in the mirror. It knew I'd seen the truth. The thing moved. It didn't walk, it flowed into the room like smoke, its long limbs unfolding. That metallic ozone smell was overwhelming, burning my nose. I didn't think, I just ran. I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock as the creature glided silently behind me. The sound of its long, sharp nails scraping against the hardwood floor is a sound I will never, ever forget. I threw the door open and just sprinted into the night. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until the street lights of the main road were bright and the sounds of cars filled my ears. I never went back to that house. I couldn't. The police found nothing. The house was empty. The woman, the thing, was gone. My grandmother was officially declared a missing person. They found my fingerprints everywhere, the broken mirror in the closet. They thought I was a scared, confused kid who had some kind of breakdown. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm crazy. But I know what I saw. I know she's still in there, in that gray, silent world behind the glass. The shard of mirror I had was gone when they found me. I must have dropped it when I was running. Sometimes I think that's for the best.
but I'm terrified of my own reflection now. Sometimes when I look in a mirror or even a dark window, I get this intense gut-twisting fear. I'll catch a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a hint of that dead, gray world. I know it's still there, and I know the monster that took my grandmother is still out here somewhere. And one day, it might come back to finish what it started. The world is full of things we don't understand, hiding just out of sight. If you have a story about something that wasn't what it seemed, share it in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories from the shadows, make sure to subscribe.